Hello and welcome. Tonight we are going to step into one of the most forgotten turning points in ancient history. A battle that ended an empire's dream. A battle that decided whether Greece would remain free. A battle that almost nobody remembers. You probably know the story of the 300. You have heard the speeches. You have seen the statues. You know the last stand at Thermopylae. But history did not end there. In fact, the real ending of the Greco-Persian War came almost a year later, not in a narrow mountain pass, but on a dusty plain near a small Greek town called Plataea. This is the story of what happened after the legend ended. This is the story of revenge, of exhaustion, of fear, of pride, and of a single decision that changed the future of Western civilization forever. Take a deep breath and let the story begin. The year is 479 BC. The greatest invasion force the ancient world has ever seen has already crossed into Greece once. The Persian king Xerxes has burned Athens. The temples of the Acropolis are ash. Greek cities lie in ruins. And the war is not over. But to understand the Battle of Plataea, we must go back to the moment victory began to taste like defeat. 3 days after the Battle of Thermopylae, Xerxes walked the battlefield. The air still smelled of blood and salt. Bodies covered the narrow pass. Among them, the body of the Spartan king Leonidas. Xerxes stopped when he saw him. Persian kings did not usually mutilate fallen enemies. Cyrus the Great had buried his rivals with honor. Darius the First had done the same. But Xerxes was not calm anymore. Leonidas and his 300 Spartans had delayed the Persian invasion for days. Thousands of Persian soldiers had died trying to break through a pass that should have fallen in hours. So Xerxes gave an order that shocked even his own officers. Cut off his head! Crucify the body! This was not strategy. This was rage, and rage would shape everything that followed. After Thermopylae, the Persian army marched south. Athens had already been evacuated. Themistocles had convinced the population to abandon the city and flee to the sea. When the Persians arrived, they found empty streets, empty homes, empty temples, and they burned everything. The Acropolis, shrines, treasuries, sacred statues. It was not simple looting, it was systematic destruction, the ancient equivalent of burning a nation's identity. But Xerxes made a critical mistake. He destroyed the city, but not the people. From ships in the harbor, Athenians watched their home burn. And something changed. You can destroy buildings, but when people survive to witness the destruction, you do not break their will. You concentrate it. Meanwhile, the Greek alliance was falling apart. Sparta had a plan. Build a massive defensive wall across the Isthmus of Corinth. Fortify it. Defend only the Peloponnese. Let northern Greece fall. Let Athens fall. Strategically, the plan made sense. Emotionally, it was a disaster. The Athenians were homeless, floating on ships, watching their city burn. They gave Sparta an ultimatum. If Sparta refused to fight for mainland Greece, Athens would sail away. They would move west, to Sicily, and build a new city there. Without the Athenian navy, Persia could sail around the Spartan wall and land troops anywhere. Sparta understood the message. The alliance survived. Barely. And that fragile alliance would soon march north toward destiny. The number to remember is not 300. The number is 5,000. 5,000 full Spartan citizens marched to Plataea. This was not symbolic. This was not ceremonial. This was nearly the entire Spartan warrior class. Something Sparta had never done before. Each Spartan was supported by helots and allies. When the full Greek force gathered, the army numbered roughly 100,000 men. The commander was Pausanias, regent of Sparta, nephew of Leonidas. He carried a burden no modern general could understand. He had to avenge a dead king, lead a fragile alliance, and defeat the largest army the Western world had ever faced, all at once. The Greeks marched north and chose their battlefield carefully. They took the high ground near Mount Kithaeron. Broken terrain, hills, uneven ground. across the Asopus River. The Persian army waited. Their commander was Mardonius, a veteran general, ambitious, confident, and dangerous. He knew his army's strength. Persian cavalry dominated open plains. Persian archers could darken the sky. But the Greeks refused to come down from the hills. And so, the armies waited. For 11 days, two massive forces staring across a river, waiting for the other to make a mistake. Ancient warfare was not constant battle. It was tension, hunger, thirst, fear. And in the end, thirst would decide everything. The Greek army had one weakness: water. Their entire force depended on a single spring known as the Gargantuan spring. One source, one lifeline, one fatal vulnerability. Mardonius knew it. Instead of charging the hills, he began a campaign of harassment. Persian cavalry swept across the plains. They intercepted supply convoys moving through the mountain passes. They burned food. They poisoned smaller water sources. They attacked messengers. This was not battle. This was slow suffocation. 80,000 men cannot survive long without water, and the Persian commander was patient. Every day the Greeks stayed in place, their situation grew worse. Then something happened that shook both armies. The Persian cavalry commander, Mecistius. Herodotus describes him as the most admired man in the Persian army. Tall, powerful, armored in gold scale armor that shimmered in the sun. During a cavalry clash near the Greek lines, his horse was struck by an arrow. The animal collapsed. Mecistius fell. Greek soldiers rushed forward. Their weapons struck his armor and bounced off. Spear after spear failed to penetrate the golden scales. Finally, a Greek soldier thrust a spear through the visor of his helmet. Mecistius died in the dust. The Greeks placed his body on a cart and rolled it along their lines. Soldiers left their positions just to look at him, the man who had seemed invincible. Across the field, the Persian army saw the display. They cut the manes of their horses in mourning. The camp echoed with grief. Small moments matter in war. Morale shifts, confidence cracks, fear spreads. And then the decisive blow came. The Persian cavalry found the Gargantuan spring. They destroyed it, collapsed the banks, filled it with debris, made it unusable. Days later, a major Greek supply convoy was intercepted and burned. Now the Greek army had no water, no food, no time. Pausanias called a council of war. The decision was correct, and it almost caused total disaster. The Greeks would retreat at night. They would move to a new position closer to the town of Plataea, a position with better access to water. The army would move in 3 columns: Spartans and Tegeans on the right, Athenians on the left, all other allies in the center. It sounds simple. It was not. Moving 100,000 men at night in the ancient world was chaos waiting to happen. No radios, no maps, no GPS, only torches, horns, and shouted orders in the dark. Every commander needed to execute the plan perfectly. That is not what happened. A Spartan officer refused the order. His name was Amphiaratus. When told to retreat, he picked up a large stone. He carried it to Pausanias. He dropped it at his feet. "This is my vote against retreat." He refused to move. Spartan culture did not tolerate retreat. Not easily, not willingly. Pausanias could not abandon Spartan soldiers, but every minute spent arguing delayed the withdrawal. The plan was unraveling. The argument lasted until nearly dawn. Finally, Amphiaratus moved, slowly, deliberately, making it clear he considered this retreat dishonorable. By the time the Spartans began marching, the rest of the army was already scattered. The Greek center had reached Plataea. The Athenians were confused and waiting for signals that never came. The Spartans were still descending from the hills. The united Greek army was no longer united. And across the river, Persian scouts were watching everything. Dawn broke. Mardonius looked across the river. The Greek camp appeared empty. Formations were scattered. Columns were moving in disorder. To him, it looked like a panicked retreat. He made the final decision of his life. He ordered the advance. Persian forces crossed the Asopus River. The Battle of Plataea had begun. The Persian cavalry struck first. They hit the Spartan rear guard, the very unit that had delayed the retreat. The Spartans halted. Pausanias sent a runner to the Athenians.
"We need you on our right flank."
The Athenians began marching toward the Spartans and ran straight into Theban forces fighting for Persia. Now the Athenians had their own battle. The Spartans were alone. What happened next has puzzled historians for centuries. Pausanias ordered his men to hold position and wait. Persian arrows began falling. Still, the Spartans did not advance. Why? He was waiting for omens. A sacrificial goat had to produce favorable signs before the attack could begin. The Tegeans beside the Spartans could not endure the arrow fire. They advanced without orders. At last, the omens were declared favorable. Pausanias gave the command. Advance. 5,000 Spartans began to move, not running, not charging, walking, shield locked to shield, spear forward, 8 ranks deep, a bronze wall moving across the battlefield. They walked into the Persian infantry. The moment of impact was terrifying. Persian arrows darkened the sky. They struck shields, helmets, armor, men. The Spartan line did not stop. They kept walking, closer, closer, until the distance disappeared. Then the lines met. The Persian infantry were not weak soldiers. They were trained, disciplined, veterans of campaigns across 3 continents. Many were immortals, the royal guard of the empire. They fought fiercely. Herodotus writes that Persian soldiers grabbed Spartan spears with their bare hands. They snapped them. They pulled warriors from the line. They fought desperately. They did not run. They died where they stood. But they were dying. The Greek shields overlapped, the bronze armor held, and the men behind pushed forward relentlessly. The phalanx does not stop because individuals fall. The phalanx keeps moving. In the center of the Persian army rode Mardonius, white horse, royal armor, surrounded by 1,000 elite guards. Persian commanders led from the front, visible, inspiring, essential. As long as Mardonius lived, the Persian army held its ground.
Then one man changed the battle.
A Spartan hoplite named Aramnestus. His name survives in the ancient sources for one reason. He picked up a stone, not a spear, not a sword, a stone from the battlefield. He threw it, with all the strength he had. The stone struck Mardonius. The Persian general fell from his horse. In the chaos of the fighting, his guards could not reach him in time. Mardonius was killed. The effect was immediate. The Persian line broke. Men who had been fighting seconds earlier turned and ran. The Spartan phalanx surged forward into the gap. The battle was no longer balanced. It was collapsing. On the Greek left, another battle raged. The Athenians fought the Thebans, Greek against Greek, hoplite against hoplite. Same weapons, same training, former allies, now enemies. The Theban commanders were among the leading families of their city. They had chosen Persia, and when the battle turned, they retreated first. Without leadership, the Thebans sold. Ears followed. The Athenian line pushed forward. Now both wings of the Persian army were breaking. Survivors fled toward the Persian camp. A massive wooden stockade on the Asopus plain. Tens of thousands rushed inside. The gates slammed shut behind them. Inside the walls were soldiers with no commander. Mardonius was dead. The army that had invaded Greece was now trapped inside its own camp. Greek forces reached the stockade. The Tegeans arrived first. They breached a section of wall and forced their way inside. The Athenians followed, tearing down wooden defenses, opening more entry points. Then the Spartans arrived. And what followed was not a battle. It was slaughter. Inside the camp, there was no formation, no leadership, no escape. Greek soldiers flooded through multiple breaches. Persian soldiers fought desperately, but there was nowhere to retreat. Ancient sources become strangely quiet here. They give numbers, then move on. Herodotus suggests that only a few thousand survived, from an army that had numbered in the hundreds of thousands. The Persian invasion of mainland Greece ended in that camp. in fire, smoke, and silence. When the killing ended, the Greeks began to explore the camp, and what they found stunned them. Persian royal luxury, gold and silver tableware, rich fabrics, decorated furniture, treasures beyond anything most Greek soldiers had ever seen. Spartan soldiers entered the tent of Mardonius. They had never seen such wealth. According to later sources, Pausanias ordered Persian cooks to prepare a royal feast. Beside it, he ordered a simple Spartan meal. He showed both to his officers. "This," he reportedly said, "is why they came to take our land." The treasure of Plataea was enormous. A tenth was dedicated to the sanctuary at Delphi, a tenth to Zeus at Olympia. The rest was divided among the allied cities. Sparta became one of the wealthiest powers in Greece. But the real victory was not gold. It was finality. Persia never invaded mainland Greece again. Not under Xerxes, not under any later king. The line had been drawn at Plataea. The invasion ended in the mud of a Boeotian field. Victory at Plataea did not feel triumphant at first. It felt quiet. Exhausted soldiers stood among the wreckage of the greatest army the world had ever seen. Bodies covered the field. Smoke drifted from the ruined camp. The air smelled of ash and iron. War does not end with cheering. It ends with silence. But history does not pause for silence. Because on that same day, or at least as the Greeks later told it, another battle was being fought far away across the sea, the Battle of Mycale. While the armies clashed at Plataea, the Greek fleet sailed along the coast of Anatolia. The Persian navy had withdrawn after the defeat at Salamis. What remained was a defensive force protecting supply routes and coastal bases. Greek commanders knew something important. If the Persian fleet survived, Persia could return. The war would never truly end. So they sailed east. Near Mount Mycale, the Greek fleet discovered the Persian ships pulled onto the shore and protected by a fortified camp. The Persians had learned from Salamis. They no longer trusted the sea. They would fight on land. Greek sailors became soldiers. They beached their ships. They formed hoplite lines, and they advanced toward the Persian fortifications. For the second time in a single day, according to Greek memory, Persian defenses were breached. The camp fell. The remaining Persian ships were burned. The Aegean Sea was no longer a Persian lake. It became a Greek sea. Whether these battles truly happened on the same day does not matter. What matters is why the Greeks told the story that way. They needed a moment when everything changed at once, a single turning point, a day when land and sea were both one, a day when the fear ended. Because fear had shaped this entire war, the fear of the Persian Empire, an empire so vast that most Greeks had never seen its borders, an empire that ruled from Egypt to India, an empire that could send armies larger than entire Greek populations. For years, the question had been simple. How do you fight something that big? At Plataea and Mycale, the Greeks found their answer. Together. The alliance that had nearly collapsed after Thermopylae now stood victorious. Sparta, Athens, Corinth, Tegea, Megara, and dozens of smaller city-states, cities that had argued, distrusted each other, threatened to abandon the war, now shared a victory that none could have achieved alone. But unity in war does not guarantee unity in peace. The Persian threat had held the Greek world together. With that threat gone, old rivalries slowly returned. And the most important rivalry of all was just beginning: Sparta and Athens. Sparta had led the land war. Athens had led the naval war. Both cities believed they had saved Greece. Both cities were right, and that was the problem. In the years after Plataea, the Greeks did not stop fighting Persia entirely. They carried the war eastward. Greek fleets attacked Persian positions across the Aegean. Greek armies liberated Greek cities along the coast of Asia Minor. But the war was changing. It was no longer a desperate struggle for survival. It was becoming something else: power, influence, empire. Athens took control of the Greek fleet. They formed what became known as the Delian League. Officially, it was an alliance to continue the war against Persia. In reality, it was the beginning of the Athenian Empire. Member cities paid tribute, ships, money, resources. Athens grew rich, powerful, confident. Sparta watched. Sparta did not build walls, did not build fleets, did not build empires. Sparta built warriors. And Spartans understood something about power. When one city grows too strong, balance breaks. And when balance breaks, war follows. The victory at Plataea had saved the Greek world from Persia, but it had also created the conditions for a new conflict, a conflict between Greeks, the Peloponnesian War. But that is a different story. For now, return to the field of Plataea, to the quiet after the storm, because the consequences of this battle were larger than Greece. They shaped the future of the Western world. Without Plataea, Athens might never have risen to power. Without Athens, no Golden Age, no Parthenon, no Socrates, no Plato, no Aristotle, no foundations of Western philosophy. Without Greek independence, Rome would inherit a different world. Without Rome, Europe would inherit a different future. All of it traces back to a muddy field in 479 BC. History often celebrates the last stand, the heroic defeat, the beautiful sacrifice. Thermopylae became legend because it ended in death. Plataea ended in victory, and victory is quieter, less poetic, but far more decisive. The 300 Spartans held a pass for 3 days. The Greeks at Plataea held a civilization for centuries. After Plataea, the battlefield slowly emptied. The dead were buried, the weapons were collected, the wounded were carried away, and the survivors began the long journey home. But nothing would ever feel the same again, because everyone who stood on that field understood something deeply. They had come within hours, maybe minutes, of losing everything. The Persian Empire did not collapse after Plataea. It remained vast, rich, powerful, but something had changed. It had been stopped. For the first time in generations, Persian expansion into mainland Greece was not just slowed, it was ended. King Xerxes was no longer on campaign. He had already returned east after earlier setbacks. The man who once burned Athens would never again lead a campaign into Europe. His ambitions had met a limit, not in a palace, not in a treaty, but in a field of dust and broken shields. Mardonius was gone, the architect of the invasion, the man who believed Greece could be absorbed into empire. His death marked more than a battlefield loss. It marked the collapse of an idea, that Greece could be ruled by force alone. But Greece itself was not unified. Victory did not erase division, it exposed it. Sparta and Athens, the two strongest powers, now stood at the center of a fragile balance. Each had carried the war in different ways. Sparta on land, Athens at sea, and both remembered their contribution very differently. Sparta saw itself as the shield of Greece, the city that never broke, the soldiers who never retreated. Athens saw itself as the savior of the sea, the fleet that had destroyed Persian naval power at Salamis, the city that had been burned yet survived. 2 stories, 1 victory, and no agreement on who mattered more. In the years that followed, alliances shifted, tribute systems expanded, naval dominance increased, old trust weakened. The Delian League, once a wartime alliance, became an instrument of Athenian control. Cities that had fought Persia now found themselves under pressure from Athens. Freedom had been saved, but peace was unstable. Meanwhile, Sparta remained distant. It did not seek empire overseas. It did not build fleets of tribute ships. It watched, and it waited. Because Sparta understood something fundamental about power. Empires grow when unchecked, and when they grow too large, they eventually collide. The story of Plataea is often told as the end of a war, but in reality, it was a beginning. The beginning of Greek dominance in the Aegean, the beginning of Athenian imperial ambition, and the beginning of a long internal struggle that would eventually tear Greece apart. But at the moment of victory, none of that was visible. What remained was exhaustion and silence. Imagine standing on that field, The sun rising over broken armor, smoke still hanging in the air, men sitting quietly beside the remains of an army that once threatened to conquer the world. There are no speeches, no celebrations that last, only the understanding that something irreversible has happened, and somewhere in that silence lies the real meaning of Plataea. Not glory, not legend, but survival. Because history often remembers the moments that look heroic, the last stand, the sacrifice, the doomed defense. But survival is what actually changes the world. Thermopylae became a story of courage. Plataea became the reason that courage mattered. One delayed an empire, the other ended its advance. And together, they reshaped the ancient world. Not through myth, but through consequence. The Persian invasion of Greece did not fail because of a single moment. It failed because of endurance, because cities refused to surrender, because alliances held long enough, because armies adapted, because decisions, small and large, accumulated into inevitability. And when it ended, nothing looked like it had before. Not Persia, not Greece, not the balance of the Mediterranean world. The war was over, but its effects were only beginning. And in the centuries that followed, storytellers would return again and again to Thermopylae, to the 300, to the sacrifice. Because sacrifice is easier to remember than survival. But the truth is simpler. Empires are not stopped by symbols. They are stopped by armies that refuse to break. And at Plataea, that is exactly what happened. This is where the legend ends, and where history begins.